The night he punched me and knocked me against the kitchen cabinet, blood running down my collar, I thought that was the final limit of what a father could endure. But no. The real humiliation was when he stood in the middle of the living room the next morning, in front of the neighbors and the 3 people I had invited to be witnesses, pointed at me and said, "This old man is weak. Whatever I say, he has to obey." The silence after that made the whole house feel like it stopped breathing, and he still thought it was his right. If there was ever a moment that made you realize respect is not something everyone knows how to give, leave a single dot and tell me where you're listening from. Your presence lets me know there are still people who value dignity, who value their parents, and who value the stories that truly deserve to be told. And I'm grateful you're here with me. On the night before the heavy rain, the house on Maple Ridge Road had already begun making the sound I hated most. Trevor's shoes dragging across the wooden floor, along with the familiar mocking tone he used whenever he was drunk, but pretending to be sober. I was patching the rattan chair on the porch, Eleanor's favorite piece, when Trevor walked over, a half-empty beer can in his hand, his eyes half contempt, half provocation. "You're still sitting here fixing this trash?" He sneered at the rattan chair I was repairing, his voice soaked in alcohol. "When this house is mine, all this old junk is gone." I pressed my lips together and ignored him. Silence is sometimes the shield of the old. But Trevor didn't stop. He tapped his foot against the maplewood table, the table I had carved over the course of 2 months as an anniversary gift for Eleanor. It shook, nearly tipping. "Why do you keep this stuff? The dead don't use it anymore." I turned around, not because I was angry, but because that sentence cut into a place I thought no one could reach anymore. "Trevor," I said, my voice low, "don't touch your mother's things." He scoffed. "You're always mother this, mother that. Take a look at yourself. If you weren't useless, she wouldn't have had to work herself to death." That wasn't a knife. It was a hammer. And it struck exactly where I still hadn't healed since the day Eleanor died. I stood up, meaning to leave, but Trevor blocked the doorway. "You think I don't know, huh?" he said, shoving his face close to mine. "You guard that bank book like it's gold. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know who this house will belong to?" I didn't answer. Then he said the next sentence loud enough for the neighbors over the fence to hear, the public humiliation he crafted on purpose. "An old man like you, how long can you live? When you die, who gets this house?" "Huh?" I heard Mrs. Walker next door gasp and drop her flower pot. Trevor knew. And he liked it. He liked turning me into a joke in my own yard. That night, when I gathered the things to bring into the kitchen, I saw Trevor standing on the steps, texting while laughing. The phone screen glared in the dark, lines of text running quickly beneath his fingers, but I was a little too far away to read the contents. I only saw his face, that half smirk, triumphant, as if he had just sealed a deal that I would be the one to pay for. A few days later, while I was cleaning downstairs, the Bluetooth speaker Trevor usually used to play music suddenly lit up. I thought it had connected by accident, but just a few seconds later, a familiar voice came through. Trevor's voice. It sounded like he was upstairs, calling someone, unaware that the speaker downstairs was still paired from the last time he used it. I froze when I heard every word broadcast clearly through the speaker. "This Monday, meet me. The old house is about to be mine." Then his voice continued, almost gleeful. "The old man's soft like dough. I just need to push a little, and he'll sign everything." I felt the whole house tilt. I didn't want to believe that was my son, but the sound coming from the speaker didn't sound like him. My heart pounded. I grabbed my phone and hurried to record the audio from the speaker, like an instinct of self-defense. I didn't confront him right then, but from that moment on, something in me changed, and the evidence I accidentally heard that day became something I could never forget. He looked at me like the final barrier standing between him and the house Eleanor left behind. That night, the rain hadn't started yet, but the Savannah wind had already begun to sweep hard through the old oaks. I sat by the gas stove, flipping through a notebook Eleanor had forgotten many years ago. A sheet of paper slipped out, her familiar slanted handwriting. Harold, don't let this house fall into the hands of someone who won't cherish it. I folded the paper, set it on the table, then looked up at the dim ceiling, and as if some warning had already reached me, I knew. Tomorrow night there would be a storm, but not from the sky, from the very child I had raised. That Savannah night felt as if someone had pulled the whole sky down onto my roof. Rain lashed against the tin roof and the wooden porch, wind sweeping through the old oaks, making the green moss sway like silhouettes, whispering in the dark. The kitchen wall clock cast a pale yellow glow across the wall, its small hand pointing exactly to 2:47 in the morning, the hour when most people are either sound asleep or lying awake alone with their thoughts. I couldn't do either. I lay on the old armchair wrapped in the wool-blend blanket Eleanor, my wife, had sewn decades ago, my eyes closed while my mind drifted among fragments of memory. The scent of long, damp pine in the 2-story house I'd built with my own hands still lingered. The smell that always made me feel like Eleanor was still somewhere nearby, moving on the stairs, adjusting the curtains, setting the coffee pot on the stove. Then the first knock exploded through the storming night. "Dad, open the door! This is my house!" Trevor's voice, my son's, rough with cheap liquor, bitter with anger, sliced into the night's quiet like a blade across glass. I opened my eyes. I recognized that knock immediately. Not the knock of a child needing help, but the knock of someone who believed he had the right to demand, the right to barge in anytime because this is his house. I sat up slowly. Old age and months of enduring made every joint creak. By the time my hand reached the doorknob, the knocking had turned into hard, relentless kicks, full of threat. I opened the door. Trevor nearly stormed inside, rain soaking his jacket, alcohol fumes rolling off him. His eyes were bloodshot, whether from booze or from that vague fury he always carried back here every time the world beat him down. "You hiding from me? Or you think I won't?" he hissed, his hands shaking with agitation. Before I could answer, he spotted Eleanor's framed photo on the shelf, the one of her in a straw hat, smiling gently beside the wild daisies behind the house. Everything happened so fast I couldn't even raise a hand. Trevor swung his arm and smashed the frame. The crack of shattering glass ripped through the kitchen that had once been the warmest place in my life. Fragments flew. One piece sliced across the back of my hand, leaving a sharp sting. I flinched slightly, but my lips stayed tight. "I need 12,000 tonight," Trevor said, his mouth curling into that arrogant smirk I'd been seeing too often lately. "I told you. I take care of this house. I carry everything. You just need to listen." I looked straight into his eyes, still, cold, unafraid. Years of being a carpenter, a husband, a father had taught me one thing. Sometimes, if you waver even a little, the whole house will collapse. "I'm not giving it," I said, my voice as light as a leaf hitting the wooden floor. My answer was like throwing gasoline on a flame. Trevor erupted. He lunged. The first punch slammed into my cheek, hard enough to knock me straight into the kitchen cabinet. My back struck the wooden edge. My head hit the counter. Then I slid down onto the cold floor. A warm trail of blood ran along my temple, slipping into my collar, mixing with the leftover rainwater. I drew in a long breath to steady myself. The whole kitchen spun for a few seconds, but I stayed silent. Trevor stood there, panting, his fists still trembling. "You'd better learn how to behave," he said, spitting the words at me. "I'm the only one taking care of this house now." Then he turned and stumbled up the stairs. The bedroom door slammed shut with a heavy crack, as if trying to tear itself off the hinges. The sound of the rain reclaimed the house. I lay still on the tile floor for a few seconds, feeling each beat inside my chest. If it had been a few years earlier, I might have jumped up, shouted back, or at least called 911. But that night, I suddenly realized what was rotting between Trevor and me wasn't something an emergency call could fix. I slowly sat up. The skin on my forehead stung when I touched it. Blood clung to my fingertips, bright red. I walked to the sink, grabbed a clean cloth, dampened it, wiped my forehead, and wiped the cut on the back of my hand. Each movement is slow, steady, without shaking. I was a man who had lived his whole life by discipline and patience. Those things were still here. I had just let someone abuse them for too long. I didn't call the police, not because I feared Trevor getting arrested, but because I understood. If I let someone step between father and son right now, everything would become files, become reports. What I needed was a different kind of judgment, one not only by law, but by the eyes of the community, by the way Trevor would have to face himself. So I turned on the stove. The warm yellow light in the kitchen suddenly felt strange and comforting. I took flour, baking powder, butter, milk, everything that was almost muscle memory to my hands. I kneaded the dough, rolled it out, cut it into even round biscuits, and set them on the tray. The smell of butter, of dough, of coffee began spreading through the kitchen, slowly pushing out the smell of alcohol and violence. It was the smell of mornings when Eleanor was still alive, the smell of the years when Trevor was just a little boy, running barefoot down the stairs, butter on his mouth, tugging my shirt, asking for another biscuit. When the last batch came out of the oven, I placed them on the wooden table I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. Maple wood, its surface still bearing faint scratches from when 8-year-old Trevor dragged his toy truck across it. I placed my palm on the tabletop, feeling each cold grain beneath my skin. So many family dinners, so many Christmases, so many moments Eleanor laughed seeing Trevor finish the last biscuit. All of it rushed back at once, and in that moment I understood. Tonight, everything had changed. If I stayed silent any longer, this table would witness things worse than a punch or a shattered frame. I couldn't let my home become a place where a drunken man rehearsed his power. I took the old cell phone from my pocket. The screen was cracked at the corner, but the 3 names in my contacts still showed clearly. First was Judge Bernice Holloway, my neighbor for 35 years, a retired federal judge who had watched Trevor grow up and once told me, "Harold, if the day comes you need justice standing right on your porch, call me." Second was Detective Marcus Reed, the big cop with the bass voice in the church choir, who always joked, "If something happens to you, I'll get there before the fire truck." Third was Pastor Elijah Brooks, our pastor who understood better than anyone the weight of the silence I'd kept for 2 years. I dialed each number. No one was asleep deeply enough to miss 3 rings at that hour. All 3 answered. I didn't explain much. I said only one sentence to each of them. "Tomorrow, 8 o'clock, please come to my house. I want Trevor to see exactly who is sitting at this table." I hung up, set the phone beside the tray of biscuits, and poured more coffee. Outside, it was still raining, but I felt the real storm already tightening its eye right here in my wooden kitchen. And this time, I wouldn't hide in my room. I would sit at the head of the table. The sound of the rain claimed the house again. I stayed lying on the tile floor for a few seconds, feeling each beat inside my chest. If it had been a few years ago, I probably would have jumped up, yelled back, or at least called 911. But that night, I suddenly realized what was rotting between Trevor and me wasn't something an emergency call could heal. I slowly sat up. The skin on my forehead throbbed when I touched it. Blood on my fingertips, bright red. I went to the sink, took a clean cloth, dampened it, wiped my forehead, wiped the cut on the back of my hand. Each movement, slow, steady, not shaking. I had been a man who lived his whole life on discipline and patience. Those things were still here. I had just let someone abuse them for too long. I didn't call the police, not because I feared Trevor being arrested, but because I knew if someone stepped between father and son now, everything would become files, become reports. What I needed was a different kind of verdict, one made not only by law, but by the gaze of the community, by the way Trevor would be forced to face himself. So I turned on the stove. The warm yellow kitchen light suddenly felt strangely comforting. I took flour, baking powder, butter, milk, everything my hands remembered on their own. I kneaded the dough, rolled it out, cut it into even round biscuits, placed them on the tray. The smell of butter, of dough, of coffee drifted through the kitchen, slowly pushing out the smell of alcohol and violence. It was the smell of mornings when Eleanor was still alive, the smell of the years when Trevor was a little boy, running barefoot down the stairs, butter on his mouth, tugging my shirt, asking for another biscuit. When the last batch came out of the oven, I set them on the wooden table I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. Maple wood, its surface still bearing faint scratches from when 8-year-old Trevor dragged his toy truck across it. I laid my palm on the tabletop, feeling each cold grain beneath my skin. So many family dinners, so many Christmases, so many moments Eleanor laughed seeing Trevor finish the last biscuit. All of it came rushing back, and in that moment I understood. Tonight, everything had changed. If I stayed silent any longer, this table would witness things far worse than a punch or a shattered frame. I couldn't let my home become a place where a drunk man rehearsed his power. I took my old cell phone from my pocket. The screen was cracked at the corner, but the 3 names in the contacts were still clear. Trevor moved back into the house 8 months ago, when he called me from a supermarket parking lot, his voice sounding strangled like someone pulled back from a cliff's edge. "Dad, I lost my job. They restructure. I got cut." I was silent a few seconds, then said, "Come home. There's always a place for you here." But I knew, buried inside his words was something I hadn't dared touch. I knew his industry didn't restructure a position that had been praised just a week earlier. And a few weeks later, when someone we both knew sent me a private message, I learned the truth. Trevor was fired for assaulting his manager. At 42, he couldn't stand being corrected. He shoved the man into a cabinet and walked out. I only sighed and didn't ask. I stayed silent. The silence I now realized had handed him more power to dominate me. From the moment he moved back, Trevor didn't return as someone needing a temporary place to stay. He came as if the house already belonged to him. It started small, rescheduling the roofer on his own, saying I booked the wrong day, calling an electrician to replace outlets and handing me the bill, then slowly using my credit card, saying it was for a few small things. At first, a few $dozen, then a few hundred, then thousands. I received bank letters with a weight like stone. But Trevor was quicker. He started collecting my mail himself, opening it, reading it, deciding what was important and what should wait. One day I asked, "Why are you taking my mail?" He answered casually, "You're old. Let me handle it." It sounded caring, but I felt the thorns beneath it. Another time I overheard him talking to his ex-girlfriend. His voice wasn't gruff like when he drank. It was lower, irritated, but also pleased with himself. "He's the same as always. Just push a little and he obeys. I told you. He's weak." He laughed, a short, dry, emotionless laugh. If I had the money sooner, I would have thrown him into a nursing home already. I froze in the hallway, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Light, like he was talking about an object, not a person. No respect. No affection a son should have for a father. No memory of Eleanor, the woman who once carried him in her arms. In that moment I knew. What happened later wasn't drunken impulse. It was who he truly was. And in that moment, I understood his target wasn't just the house. It was control. I began paying closer attention. Trevor printed stacks of strange papers. Not bank papers, not insurance, not tax. I peeked when he left the kitchen. Large, bold title on the first page, Home. Transfer and medical guardianship. I wasn't a lawyer. but I knew exactly what such documents were used for, to force an elderly person to sign over control of their assets and health. When I worked in the maintenance crew at the woodshop, a co-worker had been tricked by his own son into signing something like that and lost his entire home. I remembered telling Eleanor about it that night, and she placed her hand on mine and said, "Harold, whatever happens later, don't let this house fall into the hands of people who don't know its value." Her voice gentle but firm, she always saw farther than I did. Even before she passed, she thought about this home's peace, the place where she planted flowers, hung curtains, the place she said she wanted to watch me grow old. I stood up from the armchair and went to the bedroom. I opened the old pine wardrobe, knelt in front of the small safe at the bottom, opened the lock. Inside was something only I knew about, the Benton Family Trust document, created in 2012 when Eleanor first fell seriously ill. I had placed the house, the land, and our small savings into that trust. At the time, Trevor didn't even bother asking, "What are you signing, Dad?" And from that day on, he no longer had any legal path to take this house. I brushed my thumb along the edge of the document. Trevor had no idea. No one did, except me and Eleanor. I locked the safe carefully. When I stood, I caught my reflection in the mirror, my left cheek still swollen, the dried blood on my forehead looking like a thin crack in the earth before a major quake. I looked into my aging eyes, and what chilled me wasn't my age, but the calm in them, a dangerous calm. I knew what I would do. I returned to the kitchen, straightened the tablecloth, swept the remaining glass under the cabinet. The smell of coffee filled the air, strong and steady, like what I needed to be this morning. I pulled out a chair and sat. My hands rested neatly on the table, not shaking, not hesitating. I whispered, as if Eleanor were standing somewhere nearby, "Don't worry. I won't let this house fall into hands that don't know its value." Then I closed my eyes, released a long breath, opened them with the face of a man who had decided something irreversible. I would pretend to obey tomorrow morning, let him step deeper into the trap he dug himself, and when he sat at the table in front of the people I called, he would learn who truly takes care of this house. I woke before the sun managed to rise over the oak trees in the backyard. The savannah sky, after a night of rain, looked like a damp cloth, still holding mist, thin light slipping through the window and touching the old wooden floor, making each grain seem to wake again. My kitchen felt warmer than usual, maybe because I had turned on the lights while it was still dark, maybe because something inside me was slowly heating up. I set the table like it was Thanksgiving, even though today wasn't any holiday. A white tablecloth, Eleanor's favorite antique dishes, a basket of fresh biscuits, still steaming with butter. I made sausage, eggs, roasted potatoes, the dishes Trevor loved when he was small, when he was still sweet, still wrapping his arms around my neck every morning, still running around the house carefree like a little puppy. Now it was different. Now he didn't run around the house. He walked through it like he was inspecting his territory. I placed a large pot of coffee in the center of the table, straightened each fork, pulled the head chair back just a little, the chair Trevor had claimed for himself for the past 8 months, sitting down as if the house had changed owners. I looked at that chair longer than usual. Today he would not get that chair, not while I was still breathing. The wooden stairs began their familiar creaking. Trevor was coming down. I tightened my hand briefly on the table edge, then let go. Not tense, just ready. Trevor walked into the kitchen in a wrinkled t-shirt, eyes red from lingering alcohol. He looked at the breakfast spread and smirked with satisfaction. "Oh, finally learned your place, huh, old man?" His voice held triumph, contempt, and the certainty that last night had been enough to teach me a lesson. I didn't answer. I simply poured his coffee and placed it in front of him like every morning. He smiled, the smile of someone who believed he controlled everything in this house. Trevor headed straight for the head chair, his hand reaching for its back, a habit of claiming power, a habit I had allowed far too long. But before he could pull the chair, the knocking came. 3 knocks, firm, not rushed, not timid, not uncertain. The knock of people who didn't need permission. Trevor frowned. "Who the hell is that? At this hour?" He turned to me, waiting for an answer. I simply said, "Go open it." He grumbled and walked toward the front door. I watched from the breakfast table, my chest steady and strangely calm. The door opened, and just as I had planned, 3 figures stepped inside, not stepping in like visitors, stepping in like people who had every right to be anywhere in this house when necessary. Judge Bernice Holloway, silver hair in a neat bun, long gray coat, eyes sharp as a thin blade. Detective Marcus Reed, tall, broad, uniform crisp, name tag gleaming, gaze stern. Pastor Elijah Brooks, white shirt, small Bible still in hand, face gentle but resolute. Trevor froze on the threshold, his face drained of color in less than a second. What is this?" he stammered, both surprised and annoyed. Why are you people here in the morning?" No one answered him. Judge Bernice walked straight into the kitchen like someone who had lived here before. She pulled out a chair and sat first, calm and unbothered. Pastor Brooks smiled politely and sat to her right. Detective Reed stood for a moment, then sat as well, placing his hat beside the plate of biscuits. Trevor stood at the kitchen doorway, shoulders against the frame, eyes darting around as if he couldn't grasp what was happening. "Dad," he looked at me, voice tight. "What are you doing?" I poured another cup of coffee and set it in the empty place at the table. "Breakfast." I lifted my eyes to meet his, and I saw it clearly. The flicker of fear beneath the confusion, and the truth. My words hit the table like a safe door slamming shut. Final, solid, with no second way to open. Trevor swallowed hard. He looked at them, then at me. His lips moved, but no words formed. For the first time in months, he didn't know where to stand in his own house. I stood, pulled out the chair beside Judge Bernice, and sat down. A simple gesture, once ordinary, but today it made the air thick, heavy, like a storm about to break. My kitchen had never been this full in the morning, but now every person sat exactly where they needed to be. Trevor still stood there, hands shaking slightly, staring at the head chair, the one he'd been about to sit in a minute earlier. Now it was still empty, but no longer his. I placed more biscuits on Judge Bernice's plate and said softly, clearly, each word sinking into the wood grain, "Sit down, Trevor. We have things to discuss." He didn't sit. He only looked at me, then at them, then at the breakfast table laid out like a family ceremony. The silence stretched, the kind that couldn't be broken by shouting or alcohol. A bead of sweat slid down Trevor's temple. He was starting to understand. This morning wasn't an ordinary breakfast. It wasn't obedience like he expected. It wasn't the good behavior he thought he had forced. This was the breakfast I made for him, and for the truth he had avoided for far too long. I didn't even get a chance to speak before Judge Bernice lifted her eyes from her coffee cup, her voice low and firm like a gavel striking the bench. "Trevor Benton, sit down and sit in silence." Not an invitation, not a suggestion, a command. Trevor froze for a few seconds, his face stiffening as if slapped. I could see the flare of anger rising in his eyes, the same look that once made people in the neighborhood step back. But today, in front of these 3, that look carried no weight. Finally, Trevor pulled out the chair and sat, reluctantly, harshly, as if the seat had thorns. Judge Bernice folded her hands. "All right, Harold, tell us. Everything." I took a deep breath. Not because I was afraid, but because telling what happened last night, minute by minute, felt like forcing myself to reopen a door I should have closed long ago. But to heal, you have to peel the wound open. And today, I hid nothing. I began speaking. Every detail. From the moment the clock hit 2:47 in the morning and the pounding at the door slammed like a hammer, to when Trevor burst into the kitchen, ripped Eleanor's photo frame, to the moment "This is my house" echoed like a declaration of war. I told them about the punch, the way I was thrown back into the cabinet, my forehead splitting open, hot blood running down my collar, the way he stood there panting, looking at me like I was an obstacle in his life. No one interrupted. The three people before me listened like a jury waiting for the final testimony. When I finished, the kitchen fell silent. Trevor broke that silence first, with a dry laugh, his voice dripping contempt. "You're exaggerating, Dad. I only held you. You slipped and hit the cabinet. Don't make things up." Detective Reed narrowed his eyes. He slowly tapped the body cam on his chest twice. "Trevor," Reed said, his voice steady and cold. "Last night, neighbors called the emergency line reporting yelling, breaking sounds, and Mr. Harold crying out in pain. I was assigned to check the perimeter at 3:12 this morning." He touched the body cam. "And by regulation, when approaching a potential domestic violence situation, I must activate my body cam before entering the property area." Reed pulled out a thin report. "I stood roughly 15 yards from the porch. The camera recorded the impact sounds, Mr. Harold groaning, and clearly captured you shouting, 'This is my house!' I knocked, called out, but no one opened the door. And per protocol, if there is no direct call for help, I can only document the outer scene and file the report." Reed looked up, his tone as solid as a hammer driving a nail. "So I don't need him to retell it. I saw and heard everything. I saw Trevor's neck stiffen like wood. Judge Bernice tilted her head. 'Do you want to keep lying in front of a federal judge who worked 40 years? Trevor shut his mouth, or rather had it shut for him. Pastor Elijah placed a gentle but resonant hand on the table. "Trevor, you were born and raised in this community. Everyone knows you, and everyone knows your father. Here we do not stay silent about domestic violence, not with neighbors, and never with our parents." Trevor shot up, his chair crashing backward. "Don't preach to me," he shouted. Then he pointed at me, and his real face peeled through, layer by layer like flaking paint. "He's not a victim. He's weak, always making things bigger than they are. If he had just listened to me from the start, nothing would have happened." I saw Judge Bernice's lips tighten in disappointment. Pastor Elijah looked at Trevor like a child lost in the dark. Detective Reed lowered his chin. "You're incriminating yourself." I said nothing. I simply opened the drawer beside me, took out a thick envelope. I placed it on the table between us, exactly 1 arm's length from Trevor. "Open it." Trevor looked at the envelope as if it might explode. He slowly pulled out the papers, and I saw the pulse in his temple jump when he read the first lines, because inside the envelope were credit card statements from the past 7 months showing Trevor had been draining my account, $18,000. Online gambling debt logs accessed from his own phone. Messages with an unknown account. "Wait, the house will be under my name soon. Then I'll pay everything." Trevor flung the stack onto the table. "You went through my things? You spied on me? You betray me in front of the whole community?" I looked straight at him. "No, Trevor. I just opened my eyes in time." He slammed his fist on the table I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. The hit made the coffee pot shake. He growled, exposing the truth he'd been hiding under the Victim Act. "You useless old man. You're nothing. You're alive because of me. This house isn't yours anymore. Everyone here knows I take care of this place." The 3 people sitting across from him looked at him the way one might look at an animal driven into a corner. No doubt left, no more evidence needed. Trevor had damned himself right there, at the table he thought he ruled minutes earlier. I stood up, slowly, looked at him for a long moment. "Trevor, you just said a sentence you shouldn't have said." He inhaled sharply, defiant. "Which sentence?" I placed my hand on the back of the head chair, the chair he had claimed as his own. Then I said, "This house is not yours, and this morning You're going to learn why. The air thickened like smoke. I could hear the living room clock ticking one beat at a time. Trevor looked around at Judge Bernice, at Detective Reed, at Pastor Elijah, then at me, confusion tangled with anger. In that moment, I knew. He finally understood he no longer controlled this story. I stood up from the breakfast table, opened the bottom drawer, the one where he kept the most important documents. He placed a thin folder on the table and turned it slightly toward Trevor. You always say you want full control of this house, right? His voice was low, slow, and cold like a door being shut. Trevor looked at the folder, greed flashing openly in his eyes. Yeah, you should hand it over to me. You can't handle anything anymore. Judge Bernice raised an eyebrow, but said nothing yet. Harold opened the folder and pulled out a home transition and care authorization form, a pre-prepared home transfer care authorization paper, vague but legal enough to test Trevor's true intentions. He pushed it toward his son. Fine. If you want to take the house, sign it. I'll let you take full responsibility. Trevor scoffed, thinking victory was already his. He snatched the pen. Finally, you get it. You're old now, confused. Assets should be managed by younger people like me. Judge Bernice glanced at Detective Reed. Reed gave a small nod and pressed the record button. Trevor signed while mumbling, and every word he said dug his own. Legal grave deeper. He's not mentally sound anymore. He can't handle the house. I have to take it back to keep him safe. This property belongs to me, that's right. The pen hit the table with a click. Reed stopped the recording, removed the body cam, and placed it right in the center of the table. A declaration of mental incompetence about your own father for financial gain. Clear recording, clear signature. Trevor blinked, immediately stepping back half a pace. Wait, I was just joking. I didn't mean... Judge Bernice set her hand on the folder, her voice sharp as a blade cutting through cold fog. Mr. Trevor, you just declared your father not mentally sound, while all morning Mr. Harold has spoken coherently, recalled events precisely, and even explained financial details clearly. This is called elder fraud, and your signature combined with your own confession is first-class evidence. Trevor went pale. His lips trembled, his eyes went wild. No, I didn't sign that that was just... Reed cut him off, his voice heavy and hitting the floor like a block of stone. Too late. You said it yourself. You signed it yourself. You did this to yourself. Trevor stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. The trap had closed, and he had stepped into it with all the smugness of someone who thought he had already won. I rose from the table, feeling every joint in my body, knowing exactly what it was about to do. Trevor was still stunned, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the pen he had just used to doom himself. Judge Bernice, Detective Reed, and Pastor Elijah remained seated, their eyes following my every step. I walked to the black safe under the staircase, the one Trevor had never been allowed to open and never bothered to ask about. I entered the code, heard the soft click, and it was enough to change the air in the room. I opened the safe and took out a thick file, stamped in red, the cover clearly labeled Benton Family Trust, established 2012. Trevor swallowed hard. He didn't know. He had never even suspected. I placed the file on the table, turned it toward the three witnesses, then looked straight at Trevor. You always thought this house would be yours, didn't you? Trevor muttered, Dad, what are you doing? I opened the first page, the page my attorney drafted the year my wife died, in case my health failed or in case I needed to protect the family assets from those who didn't deserve them. This, I said, my voice not loud but sharp enough, is the family trust created 12 years ago. The entire house at 241 Maple Ridge Road, 2 acres of land behind it, the savings account, and my shares in the building materials company have all been in this trust since then. Trevor's eyes widened, his face draining of color as if all the blood had left him. I continued. Clause number 3 in the trust states, clearly no one, family or otherwise, has the right to transfer, seize, or use this house as collateral. Only the trustee, which is me, has authority. Judge Bernice nodded. Correct. With this kind of trust, even if Mr. Harold had been forced to sign something, it would carry zero legal weight. Detective Reed added, which means he just signed a meaningless document, but the statements he made while signing it are fully admissible as evidence of attempted elder financial fraud. Trevor stood frozen, his mouth open but no sound came out. I saw the exact moment he understood. He hadn't just lost, he had buried himself. I pushed the trust file a little closer to him and said the sentence I had held inside for far too long. You were never going to inherit this house. You are only a guest here. No one spoke. The only sound was Trevor's heavy breathing, thick and dark, like someone who had just swallowed the bitterest truth of his life. And I knew. This was only the second layer of the revelation. There was one more layer. Neighbors, witnesses, the entire community, waiting to step in. While Trevor was still gripping the edge of the table like a man drowning, Detective Reed stood up, his voice firm. Trevor Benton, you're coming outside with me. Not an arrest, not yet, but the warning anyone who knows the law recognizes is as heavy as cement poured onto the chest. Trevor backed away, mumbling something unclear, but Reed placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing lightly, the precise pressure of a man who'd done this job for 20 years. My front door opened. Morning light swept in. Savannah gold, cold and bare, like the truth that had just been dragged into the open. Reed led Trevor onto the porch steps. He covered his face, tried to duck his head, but it was far too late. The neighbors of Maple Ridge Road filled almost the whole walkway, not out of curiosity, but because they'd heard the shouting last night. And this morning they'd seen the patrol car parked outside my house. One person lifted their phone, then another, then an entire row of raised cameras, like spectators watching the final scene of a film that had been building for months. The murmurs rose. That's him, right? My God, he hit his own father. I heard something crash last night, but thought it was a stray cat. Trevor blurted out, Stop filming! This is a family matter. But his words were swallowed by the sharp voice of an older man across the street. Mr. Willis, the retired shipbuilder who helped me fix the porch roof back in 2015. He stepped forward, his voice loud and cold as old Savannah, steel. Family matter, a man hitting his father to take his house is no different from a thief. No one disagreed. One sentence, but it slammed into Trevor's face like a hammer in front of the entire community. He turned, but there was nowhere to hide. Cameras kept rolling, lenses pointed, directly at him, the pale face of someone realizing that losing honor in front of the community hurts far more than any courtroom sentence. A woman from the back of the crowd shouted, We've all been saying something's wrong in that house ever since he moved back. Another voice followed. Mr. Harold helped this whole block during last year's storm, and him, God help us. Trevor's face flushed, not from shame, but from rage. He screamed, You don't know anything. I'm the one keeping this house together. I stepped onto the porch, not raising my voice, not angry, just standing straight under the eyes of the whole neighborhood, as I said, Trevor, you can't even keep yourself together. How could you keep a house? A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Pastor Elijah stood behind me, his hand gently resting on my shoulder, reminding me that justice today wasn't carried by me alone, but by the entire community. Reed opened the patrol car door, signaling Trevor to get in for everyone's safety, meaning he wasn't under arrest, but he was leaving here now. Trevor fought back. Stop filming! This is humiliation! Reed replied bluntly, You did that yourself. The car door shut, a dry, heavy sound like the final period at the end of an era in this house. And just 12 minutes later, the clip of Trevor being escorted to the car, panic on his face, neighbors shouting, appeared in the Facebook group Savannah Community Watch, Maple District. 3 minutes after that, the clip had nearly 400 comments. The top comment, with nearly 50 angry reactions, came from the neighbor across the street. I used to think Harold, living alone, was sad. Turns out the real loneliness is living with a son like that. I read that comment while standing on my porch, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. That afternoon, the Savannah sky hung heavy and dim, as if rain were suspended above every oak tree. I was still sitting at the wooden kitchen table, the one I built in 1993, when Detective Reed returned. He placed a folder on the table, his eyes no longer carrying the softness they had that morning. It was the look of a police officer who had decided to open a serious case. "Mr. Harold," he said, "from now on, everything will follow criminal procedure. I'm officially opening a case: elder abuse, financial exploitation, and assault." I nodded. I wasn't shaking, wasn't afraid, just felt a quietness in my chest. Everything was moving the right way. Reed sat across from me, flipping open the first page of the file, papers, photos, printed messages, things I never imagined I'd see coming from the son I had raised. "Here," Reed said, pointing to a phone printout, "are the messages Trevor sent to someone named Carl Jensen." I looked at the bold, cold words. "A few more weeks, and the house is mine." The old man sighs, then, "I kick him out." Somehow the words "kick him out" hurt more than the punch from that night. Not because of the cruelty, but because it proved that Trevor no longer saw me as his father. Reed turned another page. He also tried to build a fake record saying you have mild memory loss. This is a message he sent to someone named Sharon at the local clinic. I read the second message, typed in italics, as a knife pushed straight into a father's chest. "Do you know any doctor who will confirm my dad has memory decline? I need paperwork to get guardianship." Reed emphasized each word. "This isn't just abuse. This is a planned property takeover." I looked out the window. The afternoon sun filtered through damp branches. My wife, if she were still alive, once said, "Harold, don't let anyone steal the house we built with 10 years of sweat." Today, her words came back clearer than ever. Around 4 in the afternoon, Pastor Elijah arrived. He sat beside me, saying nothing for a long while. Then he placed a hand on the table, his voice deep and warm. "Harold, the church has heard. I will speak on your behalf, publicly and properly. No one has the right to judge a victim of domestic violence, and you're not facing this alone." I didn't respond, just nodded. Sometimes a man doesn't need words, just someone standing on his side. Around 5:20 p.m., my phone vibrated, Reed calling. "Mr. Harold, we just finished the initial interviews. With the level of violence, with the body cam footage, with the messages about taking the house, and the credit card withdrawals, Trevor will be held for 48 hours for further investigation." I closed my eyes, not happy, not satisfied, just feeling a heavy door slowly closing after years of pretending not to hear, not to see, not to believe. Reed added, "And you should know, this won't stay at the neighborhood level. The Chatham County prosecutor's stepping in." I opened my eyes, the sunset casting a thin gold layer across the floor. "Thank you, Reed," he replied. "Don't thank me. This is the right thing." Trevor was being held. The house was quiet in a strange, unfamiliar way. But I understood. Tonight was the calm before the real storm. And in that quiet, I decided to prepare for the next stage of this fight. The community forum, the lawyer, and a counterstrike Trevor would never see coming. On the morning of the hearing, Savannah was strangely cold, the kind of cold that cuts into the palms instead of the wind. I stood on the steps of the Chatham County Courthouse, watching people stream in and out like flowing water. No one knew who I was, but I knew exactly why I was there. To speak the truth about that night, and to reclaim the dignity of a father nearly turned into a stepping stone for his son to climb over and seize a house. When officers brought Trevor out, the entire courtroom seemed to change color. He wore an orange jumpsuit, the color of someone in custody, not the color of a free man he always bragged about being. His hands were cuffed in front, his eyes ringed with dark shadows, his hair wild like he had wrestled with his own life all night long. He looked at me, his eyes filled with anger, recklessness, and fear. For the first time in his life, I saw him truly scared. Judge Holloway entered, a tall woman with silver hair swept back, no smile whatsoever, but eyes sharp like a blacksmith's blade. I knew her, the sister of Judge Bernice, a famous Savannah prosecutor, for 2 decades before taking the bench. Court is now in session, her voice echoed, freezing the room silent. The prosecutor opened the file. Each piece of evidence was presented like a hammer blow. Evidence 1, body cam footage. The screen showed the moments the police approached my house that night. Trevor shouting, furniture crashing, my voice struggling to stay steady. The courtroom murmured. Trevor bowed his head. Evidence 2, the audio from the next morning. The prosecutor pressed a button. Trevor's voice came through, each word painfully clear. My dad is not mentally sound. He has to give me the house. Trevor shot up. I didn't mean that. He tricked me. Judge Holloway didn't even look at him, just tapped her gavel, lightly. Sit down. Evidence 3, the form Trevor signed. The paper he had eagerly signed with the words, "My dad is not mentally sound," was displayed. The courtroom sighed. Anyone could see he signed with the intent to take over, not out of coercion. Evidence 4, receipts showing $18,000 withdrawn from my card, alongside a screenshot of Trevor's message to a friend, "A few more weeks and the house is mine." Judge Holloway rested her chin on her hand, her eyes cold as steel. Mr. Benton, do you have anything to say about these pieces of evidence? Trevor stood, veins in his neck tense, his voice shaking with rage. My dad set me up. He made this story up. I was only trying to take care of the house, take care of him. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. I was tricked into signing. A few people in the gallery laughed. Judge Holloway turned fully toward Trevor for the first time since the hearing began and spoke slowly, clearly, as if carving words into stone. A trap only works when you walk into it, and here, you didn't just walk in, you jumped. The courtroom erupted with gasps. Trevor's face flushed bright red, ready to argue, but Holloway raised her hand. Silence. This is not a stage for your theatrics. The prosecutor continued. Based on the video, audio, messages, financial conduct, and the victim's testimony, we request continued detainment and a protective order to ensure Mr. Harold Benton's safety. Judge Holloway nodded. I agree. Trevor Benton will remain in custody for further investigation. Court adjourned. The gavel struck with such force I felt the ground vibrate beneath my feet. Trevor was led away. A few news cameras flashed. He looked at me, his mouth forming words that never came out. I simply looked back, calm, not triumphant, just a father who understood this. Justice always arrives late, but when it arrives, it is right on time. After the preliminary hearing, I was taken to a small room in the back to meet with court representatives. It felt like after months of being pushed into a dark corner, someone finally turned on a light and told me, "You don't have to be alone anymore." Around 11 in the morning, the court clerk handed me a stack of papers, her voice steady and clear. Mr. Harold, Judge Holloway has signed 3 emergency protection orders for you. I took a deep breath before listening to each line. 1. A no-contact order for 12 months. Trevor is forbidden from calling, texting, emailing, using anyone to contact me, or approaching me in any form. If he appears within 150 meters of me, the police can arrest him immediately. 2. Trevor is banned from returning to 241 Maple Ridge Road, not to get belongings, not to talk things out, not to explain, not for any reason at all. Each word felt like a brick being placed exactly where it should have been in the protective wall I never had. 3. Full control of all assets remains with me, the lawful trustee. No one can touch the house, land, or accounts, even if Trevor tries to file for guardianship or claim my father is not mentally sound. The court stated clearly, Mr. Harold Benton is fully competent. For the first time in a very long while, I felt my chest no longer being crushed. As I stepped out of the courthouse, a woman's voice called, Mr. Harold, I'm Nora Whitcomb. Judge Bernice referred me to assist you. Nora was in her early 40s, wearing a gray suit, her eyes bright but not harsh, bright in the way of someone who had handled hundreds of family disputes and knew how to guide a tired father through a legal maze. We sat on the wooden bench outside the hallway. Mr. Harold, Nora said, the important thing now isn't only protecting you, but closing every legal door Trevor might try to crawl through. I stayed silent, letting her continue. For this case, she said, opening her briefcase and pulling out several documents, we need 3 steps. Step 1. Strengthen the Benton Family Trust. Your 2012 trust is solid, Nora said, but I will add 2 new amendments, a no contest clause and a clause excluding Trevor from inheritance if abuse is present. She looked straight at me. Trevor has committed that, so the trust can legally disinherit him. I nodded, feeling every loose knot being tightened in the right place. Step 2. Block any inheritance claim, Nora continued. Even if Trevor passes away later, Trevor will not be able to touch a single cent. I'll file with the probate court to remove his standing to contest your estate. I looked at the paperwork and silently thanked my wife. Without that 2012 trust, my life would have been torn apart by Trevor. Step 3. Address the debt Trevor created. Mr. Harold, Nora leaned in slightly, voice lower. Trevor owes about $18,000 on your card, plus several online gambling transactions. I will remove all of that responsibility from you. But the card is in my name. Because he used it without authorization, Nora answered immediately. Legally, that's identity misuse. The bank will shift the entire debt into Trevor's criminal investigation file. You pay nothing. I closed my eyes, a long, long breath, releasing everything I had held for 8 months. When I opened them again, Nora asked, Would you like to file a civil suit for damages? I shook my head. I just want the house to be peaceful again. She nodded as if she expected that answer. On the drive home, I passed under rows of oak trees, casting long shadows over the wet road. I looked into the rearview mirror, not seeing Trevor, not seeing violence, not seeing a threat. Only myself, and the road back to the house I had protected, just as I promised my wife, never letting it fall into the hands that don't know its value. That afternoon, when I stepped over the threshold, I placed my hand on the old wooden frame and said quietly, but loud enough for the entire house to hear, Now, we're safe. 3 months after Trevor was taken away in that orange jumpsuit, Savannah entered a new season of sunlight, but I still carried the cold from the night he raised his hand against his own father. I thought he would disappear from my life like a storm, loud, cruel, then gone. But this morning, at 9:12, Mr. Willis knocked on my door and said someone was standing at the end of the street, right at the edge of the no-contact boundary. He stood exactly outside the limit, not daring to step even 1 foot onto my land. And when I stepped onto the porch, I saw Trevor, gaunt, hollowed out, like someone had drained half his soul. Dark circles under his eyes of a man who couldn't sleep under the weight of his own mistakes. He stood there holding his hat, shoulders slumped, without a trace of the arrogance of the son who once screamed in my face, "This is my house!" Trevor opened his mouth, his voice so hoarse it almost dissolved into the wind. "Dad, can I talk to you for a moment?" I didn't invite him into the house he once tried to take from me. I simply stood on the porch, a boundary between a shattered past and a future that might not include him. Trevor lowered his head, then suddenly broke down, not the kind of crying to gain pity, but the kind of crying of someone who had hit rock bottom, cracking piece by piece. Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I hit you. I did terrible things. Can you forgive me? I looked at him for a long time to make sure every word I spoke came not from emotion but from the clarity of a man who had been hurt enough. Forgiveness, I said, my voice low but steady, does not mean you get to step into this house. Trevor lifted his head, eyes red, his face so desperate that even I felt a sharp ache in my chest. I understand. I just want a chance to start over. I nodded, not to comfort him, but to put on the table something he had never dared to face. Responsibility. If you want to start over, I said, you begin at the place where you broke. I handed him a paper. 4 conditions. I had prepared them long ago, not to punish him, but to see if my son had the dignity to rebuild his own life. Condition 1. Get sober. You must enroll in a 90-day recovery program and comply with random testing. No alcohol, no excuses. Condition 2. Work full-time for 12 months. No relying on me, no borrowing, no waiting for someone to help you. A real job, 8 hours a day. Condition 3. Repay the credit card debt through labor. Whatever you caused, you will pay back yourself. I won't cover it anymore. Condition 4. Attend family counseling. 1 year, 1 session every week. You must face what you did and learn not to repeat it. Trevor took the paper, his hands shaking so badly the edges trembled. His face showed shame, fear, and a weak flicker of hope, the kind of hope of someone trying to hold on to the last thing left in his life. Dad, do you think I can do it? I looked straight into those eyes, the same eyes that once shone bright when he ran home at 10 years old to show me an A in math, eyes that had darkened from alcohol, debt, and the hunger to take this house. And I said, no one can do it for you, but if you truly want it, you can. Trevor bowed his head, this time not out of humiliation, but acceptance. I'll try, Dad. I'll really try. The Savannah wind passed through the oaks, carrying the smell of damp earth after a night of rain. I watched Trevor walk away, his back bent, but his steps steadier than the last time I saw him. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that maybe not everything had turned to ash. But the door of the house still closed behind me, because forgiveness belongs to the heart, but trust belongs to time. That morning, when I opened my eyes, the house, for the first time in months, no longer carried the thick silence that smelled of fear. It was just an ordinary morning, but to me, it felt like a door had finally opened after a storm so long that people assumed it would never end. I stood up, the old blanket slipping from my shoulders, and the moment my feet touched the wooden floor, I recognized a feeling I had lost long ago. Home, in the truest sense of the word. I walked slowly down the stairs, my hand brushing the wooden banister I had repaired countless times. Here, with wood glue, there with steel nails, each patch a mark of the working life I was proud of. Morning Savannah light slipped through the hallway window, that honey-colored glow my wife and I used to watch every weekend, gentle and warm like the breath she used to place on the back of my neck in our quietest years. I opened the kitchen door, and the room, where I had once been knocked against the cabinet, once wiped blood off the wooden floor, once stood all night baking batch after batch of biscuits, like the last keeper of this home's flame, now looked entirely different. No more shadow of the storm, only morning warmth and the scent of the Kenya blend coffee I had just brewed. I set the cup down on the wooden table I built with my own hands 30 years ago, the table that once shook when Trevor yelled, that had witnessed small arguments, then big ones, then the night that made me feel as if my soul had been thrown against a wall. That night, The table seemed to tremble with me, but this morning, when I laid my palm flat against its surface, it stood firm, as if it whispered, "You survived, Harold." I finally understood something. Walnut has a strange trait. The more they are damaged, the stronger they become. Maybe people are the same. I opened the drawer and took out my wife's photo from the frame I had cleaned last night. She wore a white dress with blue flowers, her smile both gentle and proud, as if she saw through everything without ever saying it aloud. I placed the photo at the center of the table, exactly where she used to sit every Sunday morning. A sea breeze slipped through the window I had opened, and the photo trembled slightly. If one chooses to believe in the good, one could call that a greeting from her. And I do believe. I sat in the head chair. My chair, not the one Trevor once claimed as some pathetic ritual of dominance. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, heat seeping through my fingers, and for the first time in a very long time, they did not shake. I sipped, letting the bitterness spread and warm my chest, then said softly, "Not to anyone in the house, but to the woman in the photograph, to God, to the strongest part of myself. Justice isn't for revenge. It's to fix what seemed broken beyond repair." I looked around the kitchen, sunlight catching the table's surface, touching the scratch I once tried to hide but later kept. Because wounds, when we face them, become part of the grain. Far away, the Methodist church bells rang. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine from the end of Maple Ridge Road. A sparrow darted past the window, perched on the porch rail, chirping as if checking whether the house was finally safe. This house, the house Trevor nearly stole with fists, lies, and greed, was bright again. Not because the lights were on, but because the darkness had been dragged into daylight. And when the dark is unmasked, the light simply returns. I set down the cup, looked around the kitchen one last time that morning, and silently told myself, "Honey, I kept the house." Then I looked straight into the lens of my own life and spoke to the people hearing this story. If my story reaches you, if you've ever stood at the boundary between family and survival, between patience and self-preservation, leave a single dot and tell me where you're listening from. This is Harold Benton, and this is the house that finally returned to its rightful owner. If this story reminds you of a moment when you had to stand up to protect your dignity, whether from family, society, or someone who once called you blood, leave a dot and tell me where you're listening from. Your presence doesn't just support this channel, it helps others see they are not alone in reclaiming their voice. See you in the next chapter.